Andrew and Trent just sent you guys co-host invitations. So Andrew, if you hit accept there, you'll be able to come up and be a co-host, which will free up some spaces for any additional speakers, that kind of thing. So welcome, Andrew. I think appreciate you taking the time here. We'll just let a few folks kind of trickle in. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I think
yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, perfect. It was very quiet. I just want to make sure. Thanks, man.
Yeah, no, I was just
Awesome.
tweeting it out so that it comes in the current timeline for most of the people.
Yeah, exactly. No, that sounds perfect. Awesome. No, appreciate it. So, for those listening, we've been kind of talking about Dr. Menaker joining us here on our monthly market meetup for the last few weeks. So, really excited to have this conversation with him. And I know I've been unfortunately a little swamped with the day job today. So just coming out of probably my 7th or 8th meeting of the day, and I know Trend and Dr. Menaker kind of went back and forth on a bit of kind of an introduction. So I'm actually going to pass it off to
Sure.
Trend here
Yeah.
to introduce him. So thanks, Trend, for backing me up on this one.
Sure. Thank you, Rob. So today we are having Dr. Andrew Menaker, who has worked over 2.5 decades with institutional traders as a performance coach. He has devised a novel way and a concept of inner market, primary factor in success for traders and money managers. He has worked with many high performance individuals, and he has learned a lot from his experience. He does work with some individual self directed retail traders because he finds it extremely satisfying on a personal level. However, he often has a waiting list. Um, in the performance coaching space, he has a reputation for helping people recognize and develop their intuition and creativity. Now, prior to coaching high performance executives, traders, and hedge fund managers, he had training and experience with high pressure and high risk situations with US Secret Service, US military intelligence, law enforcement, and other federal agencies. Andrew has conducted dozens of bank robbery debriefings in the past, so he has a very interesting multidisciplinary background. Dr. Menaker trades himself as well. He was chronicled in the book Traders at Work: How the World's Most Successful Traders Make Their Livings in the Market, alongside other famous traders such as Linda Rashke, Alex Foster, John Carter, Anne Marie Bain, and several others. We are going to share a tweet in the nest in the spaces above, so you can follow along certain links for resources, and also at the end we'll ask Dr. Menaker on how to reach out to him. So today we will dive deeper in Dr. Menaker on his practices as a performance coach for his clients, such as as I mentioned, traders, money managers, or executives, for practices beyond the popular ones which we usually know about, such as mindfulness or NLP. So, having said that, Dr. Menaker, because you have a very different background and unconventional background as compared to many other folks who are in the industry, if you could give us a little bit of your background for the sake of our audience, that'd be awesome. So, Dr. Menaker, at the left bottom, you'll have to unmute yourself.
There we go. All right. This is my first time. My first time in Spaces, or as a host in Spaces.
Awesome.
So my background is
welcome.
is,
We're really glad to have you here, Dr.
Yeah, I'm
Menaker.
excited to be here. Thanks for the invite, guys. So something to know about me. This is, I guess, in the realm of personal disclosure, is that I've never actually had a class in finance or economics. I was a psychologist, or I am a psychologist. And I found my way into performance coaching with traders in a way that I had never anticipated. It wasn't something I had planned on or expected. I had a nice little story I could share. Back in was it 95, it was 1995, I was doing some consulting at the Alameda Naval Air Base here in the Bay Area where I live. That base is no longer around. It was decommissioned. But when I was working there doing some stress management training, I was a brand new psychologist, very green behind the ears. And I was asked to do some stress management as the base was slated for closure. They had a couple of thousand employees, civilian employees, not just military, but civilian employees there as well. And during one of my days out there, I received a page from the commanding officer saying that one of the civilian employees was on his way to the front gate from home, and he'd called in to say that he wanted to kill himself and to take out as many people as possible at the front gate at the same time. And the commanding officer asked me to come out and help him to resolve the situation. So I went out to the front gate, and it was quite a big scene. There was a lot of people with guns on both sides of the gate. Had the Alameda SWAT team on the civilian side of the gate, and the military police on the military side of the gate. Pretty much everyone had a gun except for me. And I was asked to see if I could resolve the situation peacefully. Long story short, situation was resolved. I can say more about that. It was pretty interesting how that happened. And I learned a lot in that experience because I was not prepared for it, had no training for it. It was really learning by being thrown in the frying pan, literally. High pressure situation. The situation resolved peacefully, and it got in the media, the newspaper, and Wells Fargo heard about it, and they asked me to come in and talk to them about perhaps doing some consulting work for them around threat assessment, bank robbery debriefings, and possibly working with their traders who were experiencing a lot of high pressure decision-making situations. And that's how I got into it. I began working with the Wells Fargo folks. This was in '95. Never had exposure to markets. I'd never put on a single trade myself at the time. But I quickly, the bug bit. I was quickly enamored by markets and trading. And that was my entry into the world of trading and working with traders. It was kind of at the bank level. Didn't even have my own trading account at the time. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so along those lines, I mean, so that was, obviously right before, the tech bubble and that kind of stuff. So were you dealing
Mm-hmm.
with a combination of kind of individual investment advisors and kind of the sort of on the brokerage side, as well as more of the institutional kind of sales and traders, or how did that
Yeah.
look?
Yeah, it was a lot of institutional traders, some advisors, some of the
Yeah,
investment advisors, and a lot of bank robbery debriefings and a lot of threat
gotcha.
assessment. At a large financial institution, unfortunately, there's a lot of threats that come in. Some of them are more credible than others, and so I was part of a small team that was given a lot of access to high levels of the organization to consult and develop response plans to a variety of threats and situations that were coming up. But the most interesting part for me was really working with the traders and the analysts, actually.
Sure.
The threat assessment part was very stressful, really hard. And it's not, it wasn't what I'd ever planned on doing. The whole thing, like I said, I never had a finance class even. So working in a bank or working as a consultant in a bank as a psychologist, was very, very new to me.
Absolutely, I can only imagine, right? I mean, that's got to be some pretty serious conversations and heavy conversations to
Mm-hmm.
have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I mean, I guess focusing more on the trading, on the traders and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
How you have some great white papers out there, which we can share and pin to Ness as well, which is on your website. So I would certainly encourage all of you listening, and those that will be listening afterwards to review those. And but I guess from the early days, Andrew, in terms of kind of where you are today, I guess how has your process or your the way that you approach kind of the trader psyche, right?
Mm-hmm.
How's that evolved? From
Mm-hmm.
kind of the early
Mm-hmm.
days to where we are today in 2022.
Yeah, great question. I learned a lot from working with these institutional traders. And then when I think I opened my own account, I think soon after that in '96. And of course, it was sort of the very beginning of the dot-com boom, living here in San Francisco, and just a lot of activity going on in the trading world. And I quickly learned that, and this really shaped my philosophy as a performance coach, that we don't see the market as it is, we see it as we are. And that came, directly from my training as a psychologist. The old Rorschach ink blot test. It's a wonderful test. You show these ambiguous ink blots to somebody, and you ask them to tell you what they see. And it's designed. There's no right or wrong answer. It's designed to access a person's psyche and reveal kind of something about them that they may not even be aware of. And I began to realize that when we're looking at a market or looking at a chart, looking at a screen, it's the same type of dynamic in that, of course, we all know you can show the same chart to 10 or 20 or 100 different people, and you're going to get that many different opinions. And that's because we don't see it as it is. It's really impossible to be actually objective. We see it as we are, and our own personal filter, which is comprised of many different factors, that filter, which we can talk a little bit about if you'd like. And
Yes.
that was really my kind of the philosophy I developed really early on in working with the bank traders. And I've enlarged that, refined it, and have a lot of models that I've created based upon that whole concept of we don't see the market as it is, we see it as we are. So
Amazing. Yeah, there's my good friend who's in the UK, Chris Moyer, at Thousand FX. He sent me a paper a number of months ago around basically around snakes in the grass, right? And the charts that you see on the screen is a I think it's a relatively a well-known paper, but it was very interesting. And as soon as I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is you're trying to avoid the snakes on the grass, but they're on the screen on the trading screens and that kind of thing. It's very fascinating, which ties into kind of the ink blot and that kind of thing. So yes, I mean, I guess is that sort of where the inner market and your concept there, is that sort of how that stemmed from the kind of that ink block ink
blot.
kind of, yeah, ink blot. Sorry, it's been a long day, Dr. Menaker.
Oh, same here.
So it's the ink blot
component.
Is that kind of what stemmed from, or
Yeah.
thought process? Yeah.
It is very much
Awesome.
so. In fact, there was a sort of a stage, and I still use this model as well, when I kind of first kind of discovered this concept about we don't see the market as it is, we see it as we are. My first model I created based upon that, and I still use it, and this kind of eventually evolved into the inner market model that I have. This idea of internal and external data, and the idea that I was working with analysts and traders who were highly educated, very intellectual, very, very intelligent, and crunching data, analyzing an incredible amount of information. But what I would often see is that in the heat of the moment, something else would happen. They wouldn't necessarily behave or react or respond in the way that they had thought they would. That they would see something else, or they would feel something else, or they would just act out in a way that they hadn't anticipated. And so I began to realize that based upon my that threat hostage negotiation experience I had at the Navy base prior to all this, I realized that, and I also took on some additional threat assessment training for myself. I took a lot of classes in that as a psychologist, sort of my continuing ed to keep my license active. I sort of began to take a lot of coursework in that as a psychologist, and I realized that under conditions of high pressure and or when the external data, and that external data means anything outside of us, what we see on the screen, the news, politics, anything that lives outside of you, in a high pressure situation, what's going to happen is we think we're responding to the external data, but the higher the pressure, as well as the more ambiguous the external data can become, and it's always ambiguous to various degrees, what's going to happen is we begin to perceive and judge and finally actually interact with that external data based more on what I call the internal data. The internal data starts to become more of a variable, a larger factor, without us realizing it, the higher the pressure that we're under. And that internal data is comprised really of two broad categories, very broad. One of them is, I call it the biology category, or just physiology. It's, how much sleep we've had, hormone ratios, glucose levels, how much caffeine you've had. And there's a lot of interesting research, gut biome. There's a lot of things physiologically that that are going on, that our brain is using to interpret our environment. And then the other category of the internal data is emotion and feeling. And so those two categories of internal data become very important in high pressure situations. So it becomes, in my opinion, extremely important to understand your internal data. And that's kind of how that eventually evolved into this inner market model that I have. But the background of it really is the fact that the brain needs data to make a decision. We think we're using, when we're trading, that we're responding to the data outside of us. But again, in a high pressure situation, whether it's trading or a threat situation or anything that's high pressure, the internal data it becomes very influential to the point where it actually becomes more influential than the external data.
So, Dr. Menaker,
Mm-hmm.
quickly, if we wanted to just dissect, you mentioned a bunch of internal data items, right?
Mm-hmm.
Caffeine,
Mm-hmm.
heart rate variability, gut biome.
Mm-hmm.
If you could
Mm-hmm.
provide like one or two sentences for the sake of this audience on
Mm-hmm.
what those findings have been, then that'd be amazing, because I know some of
Mm-hmm.
us, at least, I know I drink a lot of coffee, and there are fellow traders who drink a lot of coffee too, and how it affects
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
performance of
Yeah,
trading.
yeah. Well, I mean, just with caffeine, there's an optimum level. Some caffeine is associated with improved cognitive functioning, but too much, we kind of get over the line. Here's a really important factor is the amount and quality of sleep that we have. There's been good research that shows, this is not just my opinion, but the research backs it up, that when we are sleep deprived, it changes our perception of risk. And for 2/3 of the people that they've researched out on this, and I can share anecdotally that I believe that the results are consistent with what I've seen, about 2/3 of the time when we are deprived of sleep, we tend to be a little bit more risk seeking or more tolerant of risk. The other third of the time, we tend to be a little bit more risk averse. But in any event, sleep deprivation does lead to a change in how we perceive risk. So the takeaway from that for everyone listening is that when you're sleep deprived, it may not be a good idea to be trading. Now, if you're on a trading desk, you may not have a choice. If you're a professional, you have to trade. You have to manage your portfolio, and maybe if you're trading your own account, you may have to still manage your portfolio. But if you're just someone who's just like a discretionary day trader, for instance, and you didn't get a good quality night of sleep, the challenge can be, can you recognize that maybe you're not in the best place to be a risk manager? Because of course, successful trading involves two simultaneous activities, which are often very difficult to do together, which is identify opportunity and manage risk. Most people tend to fall more on one side than the other, the opportunity side or on the manage risk side. But we have to do both equally as well. And when we're sleep deprived, the risk management part ends up usually suffering.
Trent, did you have any follow-up there?
Yes, sorry. I was actually trying to
Okay.
share Dr. Menaker's tweet regarding that sleep deprivation changes risk perception. I was
Yeah.
also trying to share the other tweet where you mentioned that a big part of managing the emotion is related to nutrition, exercise, and sleep. So, can you touch upon the exercise as well as the nutrition part? Because many times what happens is we tend to eat at our desk, not really paying attention, or really internalizing what we're eating. And or are there any specific focus enhancing or those kind of nutritional habits that are helpful? And then we'll move on to the emotional part. So if we could
Sure.
go in that order, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, that's the perfect order to go in. Actually, when I work with a client, I like to start with what I call the base of the pyramid, which is the physiology, the biology, which is very influential on our psychology. Nutrition is a wonderful place to start. A quick tip that I can give everyone, which is generally it's best to have more protein in the morning than later in the day. Most people, in many cultures, people tend to not have protein in the morning. They might have a sweet roll or a bagel or something like that in their coffee, piece of fruit. It takes the low blood sugar away and you feel a little bit better. But usually what happens in a couple of hours after a proteinless breakfast with no protein or very little, your glucose levels are going to plummet. And when you have low glucose levels, it's really hard to have willpower. And so I'm going to, first suggestion is, have a good quality breakfast with some protein in the morning, and also hydrate. One of the best things you can do first thing in the morning is just drink a glass of water before you have the coffee, before you do anything else, is just have a big glass of water. Most people, I have a physician friend of mine and also another friend who's a neurobiologist, pointed out to me that most people are in some degree dehydrated. Most of us, most of the time, we don't drink enough water. So starting off the day with a good amount of water, good protein, is a great way to start your day.
So
That's amazing.
my 3 egg omelet is a good go-to strategy, eh?
And be
I never thought
drinking
about
water all day. Yeah.
Yeah, you know exactly. Yeah. I've got a liter and a half like little
Mm-hmm.
canteen that's at my desk, which I typically go through 2 to 3 of those a day
Oh,
at the
good.
desk. So yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah.
and for the sake of audience, I've shared some of the related tweets from Andrew at the top of the spaces and the tweet nest. Um, uh, Andrew, you also mentioned about tracking heart rate variability, and you specifically mentioned about Aura Ring. If you could dive deep
Mm-hmm.
into
Mm-hmm.
that,
Mm-hmm.
just give us some.
Yeah. Yeah. I've used a lot of different self trackers over the years. I'm currently on, I think it's is it the second generation of the Aura Ring? It's the one that came out in the last couple of months. I have to say, the Aura people may not like me to say this, but I don't know about how accurate it is for the sleep tracking, only because it does it by proxy using a series of algorithms. Unless you have electrodes directly attached to your brain, it's nearly impossible to have an accurate measure of sleep. Although I think there's some good correlation. But it's an interesting. I think the measures of the Aura Ring that I find the most useful for me, and many of my clients do as well, is things like resting heart rate, and respiratory rate, particularly resting heart rate while you're sleeping. That really has it's a very significant factor in resilience. They call it, in the Aura Ring, the Aura people call it your readiness factor. When I think of it more as resilience. And so I know for days for myself, like for instance, by the way, turns out I just got back from a short vacation a few days ago, came home not feeling so well, and I tested positive for COVID the other day. So I'm actually not feeling so great. And I've noticed, of course, my resting heart rate has been pretty high when I'm sleeping, which is not a good thing for resilience. So I'm actually really, not doing much in the markets because I'm not at my best. So it's a good application for that. I also do a lot of HRV, heart rate variability, biofeedback work. I've done that with myself, and I do that with some of my clients who are interested in it. You do that during the day, trying to manage your heart rate variability through breathing and through various thoughts you can kind of generate for yourself as well. So there's a huge physiological, bottom line is that there's a huge, huge physiological connection to our psychology that most people don't recognize. As a matter of fact, the most current neuroscience view of emotion is that emotion is often, it begins physiologically. It's a chemical and electrical, and there's a lot of different pressures, I should say, a lot of different things happening in our body. Emotion begins physiologically. And our brain is really, what its job is to do is to keep the body alive through allostasis and homeostasis, make sure your heart rate and respiration and everything is within an optimum level. And when things are off, we have a feeling. It creates a feeling. Like a neurobiologist, for example, would say that thirst or hunger, they call those homeostatic emotions. It's a drive that the brain creates. It's a feeling that's created. So emotion actually begins on a physiological level. Gut biome, there's a lot of areas. Our heart has more electrical activity than our brain, for instance. Here's another interesting piece of trivia. There's more serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. They shouldn't even call it a neurotransmitter, because what you're about to hear, there's more serotonin in our gut than there is in our brain. So this idea that trading is a mind thing, it's a mental thing, of course it is, but our body is very much involved as well.
So, Andrew, is it you mean to say the gut biome influences the serotonin which we
Yeah.
get? Okay, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And then
Okay, great.
serotonin has a big influence on mood and
Of
how we
course.
construct our emotions, because we construct our own emotions. They're not just these neural circuits that get triggered by the market. That's an easy way to talk about it. But what's really happening on a neuroscientific level, on a neurobiological level, is that we're actually creating our emotions. We're constructing them in real time based upon our physiological state, based upon the environment we might find ourselves in. For a trader, that's the market, as well as other things in your life. And then the third factor is, our memory. It's like we're going to go back and think to ourselves really quickly, subconsciously, automatically, involuntarily, what does this experience remind me of? And then based upon the reference or the memory, that's one factor. Second factor is the environment, what's currently in front of me, the screen, and then my physiological state. Those three things come together. Those are the three primary ingredients that we construct our emotions out of. So we're constantly constructing emotions. It's interesting. They're not getting triggered. We're constructing them.
Great. So that brings us to our segue towards the emotional intelligence part, as well as our own emotion as a source of alpha for our trading, for portfolio construction, for money managers, or for even advisors, such as the registered investment advisors. So if you could touch upon the emotional part and also give some tips related to that, of when someone is either making a decision for entering a trade or exiting a trade, or even deciding upon the portfolio construction, um, that would be great, of how to harness that. So first, your viewpoint on the overall using your own emotion for an advantage, and just towards how do we do it?
Yeah. The first thing I would say about that is I think most people would be served well if they were to alter their opinion or their idea of what emotion is as a trader. And that historically, emotion is seen as an obstacle or a problem or a weakness or something to eliminate. And we are emotional creatures. Emotion is very much a part of being human. As a matter of fact, if we don't have emotion, it would be nearly impossible to actually make a decision. There's some research at Harvard some years ago. They were actually doing some behavioral economics research, neuroeconomic research, and they showed that one of the roles of emotion is that it's an attentional gatekeeper. We have lots of data coming in, olfactory, kinetic, visual, auditory. There's so much sensory data coming in that we're being bombarded, and our brain needs to decide what to pay attention to. And so emotion, one of the purposes of emotion is as an intentional gatekeeper, what's important to pay attention to. And so when you think about emotion that way, it's really important to understand that A, we're emotional creatures, and that B, emotion is an important source of information. And when you begin to understand how your emotions operate in terms of patterns that repeat with your emotions and feelings, and by the way, emotions and feelings are a little different. We can get into that perhaps down the road. It's a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. But when you begin to recognize or understand or realize that emotion is really a source of information, you begin to see yourself as a trader. You begin to understand your emotional experience much differently. And that often can be a very important pivot point for a trader. They might feel, somebody who, let's say, for example, they know that they put on too many impulse trades. Well, if you, understand how emotions actually work, how they operate, what they mean, you might begin to get a sense that that feeling that you have that comes right before you hit the buy or sell button to launch yourself into a trade, well, that's an important piece of information. That's what I call a personal indicator for that person. Maybe that anxiety or that FOMO or whatever the experience is that the person describes it as, to be able to be really clued into that and look for that. That's your personal indicator. And when I see that, it means I actually need to back away from the buy or sell button, not go towards it. So that's an example of using emotion of information. It's kind of a basic example, but you can take it as far as in this idea of emotion as information. That's a basic example, and a more advanced example, and there's a lot in between, is that when you really become self-aware and understand what you're feeling and why you're feeling it and how you create your own emotions and the patterns involved in the creation of your own emotions, when you get good at that, that's what opens the door to really begin to differentiate intuition from emotion, which is actually a very important part of trading. It doesn't get talked about very often because professionals really can't talk about it because their investors would run for the hills if a professional, if a hedge fund or somebody was talking about intuition. Clients don't want to hear that. They want to know about research and analysis and hard data. But intuition, I can share with you, is a huge part of successful trading. I've worked with some of the top traders in the world, and they would never talk about this publicly, but very often intuition plays a very central role in their most important decisions.
Yeah, and that goes into also connecting with the part which you mentioned, right, about the memory. So experience has a
Mm-hmm.
huge weight, and that experience could depend upon whether or not A, one was exposed to the right practices, B,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
again.
Yeah. And very often what I end up doing as a performance coach is many of my clients who are highly intelligent people, very analytical, high achievers, and they've also learned along the way to try and ignore their emotions because perhaps becoming a highly knowledgeable quant required them to not pay attention to their emotions. So now they're trading, yet they're still emotional creatures like all humans are. So often what I end up doing as a performance coach, a lot of the first kind of phase in the coaching, if you will, and it actually goes on indefinitely, but the first phase, there has to be a focus on emotional awareness and kind of guiding or teaching my client how to recognize truly how they're feeling and where those feelings are coming from, how they're creating their feelings, and actually diving into it, which is a very foreign thing for many very highly analytical people.
So
Yeah, it was.
sorry, in that regard, from a guidance perspective, do you encourage them to journal post trade and pre trade? So before
Mm-hmm.
decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, journaling and the various different forms of it is really important. Most traders tend to, if they do journal, they write down what the market did and what they did, which is okay. That's great. It's a good start. But I think and may even write about what they want to do before the trade, the pre and the post. But there's another form of journaling that I teach. I call it drill down writing, which is more live journaling in the moment, where you have a pen and your notebook, your paper there on your desk, and you're writing down you're asking yourself questions and trying to respond as directly and honestly as possible. What am I feeling? What's behind this feeling? Why am I feeling this way? When have I felt this way before? What is this feeling tempting me to do? Does when I act out on this feeling, how does it usually work out for me? Is this part of my plan? Those types of things, self-directed questions centering around your feelings and emotions in real time as you're facing the market. I don't even call it journaling because it's more of an active exercise. I call it drill down writing. It's extremely helpful, very powerful, very powerful.
So I want to also ask any similarity or differences of this specific drill down technique with CBT. So CBT for the audience is cognitive behavioral techniques. So is this a form of CBT that you have come up with?
Actually, not.
A different.
Yeah, I mean, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is which is in vogue now. By the way, the reason why it's so popular, actually, is to be honest with you, here's the dirty little secret. It's not because it's the most effective form of therapy. It's because it's the third-party payers, the insurance companies, when they want to approve a treatment plan and reimburse the provider, they want to see KPIs. They want to see things like that. And with cognitive behavioral therapy, you can do that. Cognitive behavioral therapy is about reframing your thoughts. And it sounds like maybe that's what I'm referring to here, but I'm actually not talking about reframing your thoughts. If I'm looking at the market and it's like moving really dramatically in one particular direction, for me to tell myself, oh, I need to reframe how I'm thinking about this, to be honest with you, what's going to happen is still going to be a high potential of acting out on the anxiety of missing out. It's better
Yeah.
if rather than trying to reframe the anxiety, it's better to just drill into it. That's why I call it the drill down, to actually lean into the feelings, immerse yourself into it, allow yourself to feel it, and then try and understand why you're feeling it. The why part of it is the difference between what I'm suggesting versus what CPT says. CPT says try and reframe it. What I say is actually lean into it and try and understand why.
That's
And that's
amazing.
it's harder to do, but I'll tell you, much bigger bang for your buck than because most traders try and do CBT anyways. They try and, well, I should convince myself of this, convince myself of that. That's what CBT is. It's really trying to convince yourself of something. And good luck with that. No one's going to be able to do that for very, very successfully when you're trading and you're thinking about your P&L and the market's moving in this direction and you're on the wrong side or you're not sure what to do. And, it's very hard that post-it note about be patient, don't be greedy, or try and reframe my anxiety into something else. You might get a temporary behavioral change in a positive way from that, but it's not a very, in my opinion, in my experience personally as a trader myself and working with many, many traders, it's much more effective, but it's scarier and harder to actually lean into the emotions and understand them rather than trying to reframe them. And not only that, but you'll also, if you're also constantly reframing your emotions, you lose the pathway to learning about your intuition.
Yeah,
And that's a really big thing. So,
Yep, and
so
I
well said.
just want to steer towards one aspect about the techniques, right? So, as you have dealt with thousands of traders, what kind of results have you seen? Does it help them from not taking the trades they're not supposed to take? Does it help them with drawdowns or dealing with drawdowns? Does it help them? So, what kind of impact or what kind of tangible P&L results you come across while dealing with traders, and what has not worked for them? And I know it is very personal from individual to individual,
Oh,
but
very different. Yeah.
yeah, but broadly speaking, one first part of the question is about the results, and then the
Yeah.
second part of the question is about um, what how has some of how have some of the techniques
Yeah, great question. So, when I first work with someone, when I first meet them, I'm thinking about where is this person on the risk spectrum, meaning what is their default mode under pressure? Do they tend to move more towards risk aversion or more towards risk seeking? Many people will flip back and forth, but most of us do tend to have a default place in that risk spectrum that we go to more often than not. So when I start to get a sense of that, then I can start to give them different exercises to deal with that. Surprisingly, many people might be surprised to hear this. So one kind of outcome that I think this is, give people a sense of hope if they're struggling as a trader, is that what I see with many traders who have not been able to be successful, who are struggling, or maybe they're just break-even traders. What I often see is really not that they need to become anywhere close to being perfect or anywhere close to eliminating all of their problems. What really just needs to happen, for instance, is if someone can just eliminate 20%, 25%, maybe even 15%, often just way less than half of their worst trades. That right there has a dramatic impact on most people's P&L. For most traders, if you go back and look at what's happening for them, it's usually a few big bad trades often that are responsible for why they're not successful. Now, there's other traders that cut themselves up. Many times we can do that during any given day. Take a lot of paper cuts, take a lot of small cuts. But very often, in terms of really creating sustainable trading success, I often will set a goal with a client, and the goal could be, hey, in the next 6 weeks, can we see a 25% reduction in impulse trades? Now, at first, when a trader hears that, they might think, well, gosh, I want to eliminate all my impulse trades. And it's like, well, you're never going to eliminate them completely, because I'll tell you, even the very best traders in the world still fall into it sometimes. But if you can start to take a chunk out of it, that usually, for most traders, pretty much all traders, will have a dramatic positive impact on your P&L. And I've seen traders who've never made money from trading, never had a positive green year from their day trading, end up having their first positive green year by simply just reducing the number of impulse trades by often just less than 50%.
Yeah, the white paper you have out. So again, we'll certainly be sharing these, but it was the boom and bust cycle and sustaining higher levels of performance. That's one that you have on your website that really resonated with me. And again, it kind of goes through a lot of what Dr. Menaker's reviewing today and what Trent is kind of referring to. But for those that are joining today from Hedgeye, we know Keith McCullough has referenced Annie Duke in the past, right? And he actually, referenced her book, Not Thinking in Bets, which you kind of allude to in your paper there. But how to decide. He mentioned it on the macro show yesterday, and so Dr. Menaker mentions it as well, right? In terms of resulting and how both in poker and trading, a poor hand can win, and the good hand, a strong hand can lose. So there's a level of kind of skill and luck, but involved in both. And I know I'm sure many here have read either both those books or certainly one of them, as there's a lot of commonality there. But that the whole, I'd encourage everybody listening and those that do afterhand to really, walk through that paper because,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Menaker, you mentioned again, it's like one of those things at the very end, you finish it up with the fact that, if you've, if you are a bit of a boom and bust trader, right, and you're stuck on that
Mm-hmm.
profit ceiling, like you just referenced,
Mm-hmm.
there's, a number of ways to improve upon that. And one of the biggest ones is not just journaling kind of the,
Mm-hmm.
when you were taking the
Mm-hmm.
trade and kind of the influences that were happening there, but also kind of the why in
Mm-hmm.
regards to your feeling, right? And why was that,
Mm-hmm.
why,
Mm-hmm.
what were you feeling? And so, yeah, this is it's fantastic. It's certainly, we started our conversation about certainly that, you and we sat down earlier this month, but obviously you confirmed with me about a month or so ago, and that's when I got in, read that paper, and it's and again, I've been lucky enough to be a profitable trader, but it's certainly, ebbing that or understanding that emotional side as to, the impulse trade, right, Dr. Maneker, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
suppressing that. And one could think, okay, be more like a robot or what have you, but it's not even that, right? It's just understanding who you are, because your psyche, everyone on this call has a
Yeah.
different level of risk that they're willing to tolerate, and
Mm-hmm.
different emotions that flow through them when they're either looking at the screen,
Mm-hmm.
or putting in a ticket, or kind of,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
aka actually executing, I should
Mm-hmm.
say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's very personal. We go through this a lot, Dr. Menaker, in terms of like the
Mm-hmm.
process. I think you're familiar. I mentioned our weekly notebook reviews, and then another kind of content that I do is called exploring the process. And that
Mm-hmm.
process, one of the unique things about that is that, even leveraging the same tools, right? So at Hedgeye, we get, like, there's a number of different kind of products that are available, and, the same person, so I see, Brian Ross is here, Andrew Palmer, Turtle Cap, there's a number, Bill Dave, the list goes on in terms of like friendly faces, et cetera, et cetera. But we may all have the exact same kind of content that's delivered to us in our inbox, but we leverage it in different manners, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of, not only, generating, coming up with the idea, it might be a
Mm-hmm.
similar one, but it's like, but we might have variations on that, and certainly
Mm-hmm.
timing as
Mm-hmm.
well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
really impactful. So I guess my question to you, just along those things, as we come up to kind of like the 45-minute mark here, and then we'll kind of perhaps open it up to some questions, Dr. Menaker, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But
Yeah.
my question to you is, if we go to kind of some, again, think, you've had the, uh, I'm going to say luxury. Perhaps it's been, it's been, fun in times, and other times, a headache. But you've had the luxury of kind of sitting down with some very elite, players in the space, right? In terms of, big time hedge fund managers, traders, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I guess my one question, or I have many questions for you, to be honest, but,
Mm-hmm.
the core one here that I'd like to kind of finish on is, what have you seen as commonalities, right, across
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
successful people? Because again, going
Mm-hmm.
back to my
Mm-hmm.
point a few minutes ago, people take different approaches to the same game, which
Mm-hmm.
we'll
Mm-hmm.
call the game of investing.
Right.
Where have you seen kind of commonalities there, across different kind of,
Mm-hmm.
across different folks. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the commonalities, not the only one, but certainly one of the ones that really stands out, is that very high performers, high achievers in the trading world, they have a tendency, whether they've consciously done this or not, but they have a tendency to separate their outcomes from their process. In other words, yes, they're trading for P&L and they're looking for certain outcomes, but they also understand that as much as they focus on their process, they can't control the outcome. And as a result of that, those same people, those high achievers that I'm referring to, they don't allow their P&L to define their self-worth as much as other traders do. And that gives them a greater sense of resilience when they're maybe in a drawdown or maybe when things aren't going quite as well. It also protects them from being overconfident and arrogant when things are going well, not allowing your self-worth to be defined by your P&L. And one of the ways you do that is to think of your process as, although it's related to the outcomes, there's kind of a loose association to the outcome, right? You can have a great process and still lose money, and you can also have a lousy process and make money, right? As we know in the poker world, there's a lot of great examples of that, but also in trading. So being able to recognize that, well, what do I have control over? And the high achievers know what they have control over, which is the process. In other words, it's their decision-making quality, the quality of their decision-making. And they really focus on that. And they, whether they realize it or not, what they've been doing is they've been evaluating themselves on the quality of their decision-making separate from the outcomes. And which is a very nuanced thing to do. Most people don't recognize the importance of that. I talk about it in that boom and bust white paper, but it's really important. Another related thing, Robert, that they tend to do is, everyone wants to be right, and high achievers are no different. They want to be right. Perhaps one could argue they want to be right even more so. But what they've been able to do to attain and sustain, I should say, high levels of performance is that they've been able to focus not exclusively on being right. They have other things that they focus on. For instance, they focus on accuracy. How accurate am I responding to my plan? And that becomes something that they measure and keep track of. It's just as important, perhaps, as how right am I or how much money am I making? So there's a lot of interesting ways that I've seen how high achievers operate, and I've been able to take that from what I've learned a lot early on, especially early on in my career, because I certainly didn't go to school or wasn't formally trained in doing the kind of work I'm doing. I learned a lot kind of on the job. And
Yeah.
I've learned a lot from really top traders, to be honest. I've learned an incredible amount, not just about markets, which I actually have also, but just how they operate.
Sure.
And it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
And
Mike
that's
Taylor.
amazing, because I wanted to just contextualize this. Just this morning in our macro show, Keith mentioned about the resulting bias that sometimes comes into play, that, as you mentioned about the poker players with bad hands, if they win, is that a good process? No. So I think that's a very useful insight, that high performing achievers have two traits that stand out. One is quality of decision making, and second is accuracy in responding to one's plan as per the process. Sorry, Rob, I didn't mean to cut you, but
No, I was just going to say, what this whole monthly market meetup kind of stemmed from a conversation with Mike Taylor, right? And one of the things he has said, and I don't believe it was on that call, but it was with a conversation with Keith McCullough in the past, which really resonated with me, Andrew, which is exactly kind of along those lines, which was, he was a high performing hedge fund manager, and it's basically track the days that you're green, right? Have more green days than red days in terms of like your overall portfolio, and if you can do that, okay. I think his goal was, I think he said something about, if that percentage is over 55%, then you're going to be a top performer, across the board. And that's really resonated with me from a goal standpoint, in terms of just, being red. It's not, and that's in terms of alpha, in terms of like your benchmark, right? So if you've got, so if you're positively, outperforming your benchmark on a higher than 55%, anyway, I think you get the point. But yes,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. So, with this time, I think we got a couple questions here. So, our good friend Andrew Palmer, the floor is yours, my friend.
Hey guys, something Andrew said there that kind of I wanted to ask a question about in that last response. I read a book many years ago called The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Dr. Nathaniel Branden. It was probably one of the more impactful books I've ever read on my life. So, Andrew, do you find that there's a high level of, with the high level traders you work with, do you find kind of a high level of self-esteem that allows people to be a little bit, because you're talking a lot about self-reflection and being metacognitive and owning your own behaviors. Can you speak to that a little bit and have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. So I think of it a little bit differently than just self-esteem. I think of it more in terms of self-worth, which sounds similar, but it is actually different. And what I mean by that is, a good example would be that not allowing your P&L to define how you feel about yourself, and also being able to make sure that you have your personal needs met in your life, or try work towards having those needs met, and in other words, not being a needy person and then coming to trading. I've seen this a lot where boy, a trader may have just gone through a divorce or through some dramatic personal thing in their life, or they're just not very satisfied in their personal life. And very often, what I'll see is their trading is sort of like a substitution, or they're attempting to have some personal needs being met in their trading that they're not getting in their life. And so, very often, it can be helpful, really helpful, to make sure that you lead a gratifying life for yourself in many respects, relationships and health and other areas of your life. Have a good sense of who you are and belief in yourself and self-worth. And then what happens is you're going to be a little less tied to that P&L defining who you are, which is really important in trading.
Yeah, that's I could not agree more. I think that there's a big correlation there in terms of just happiness in your life, in terms of just being happy with your execution, especially your process. Right, there's going to be days where it doesn't quite produce the results you're looking for, but then there's other days where the P&L is massively outperforming, and even then you have to kind of it's just almost like it's another day in the job, right? Like it's just that's not gonna really creep into doing a puzzle with my kids, because that's the part of the day that really is to me one of my most important. But I'll
we have three more questions.
we got a lot of questions here, so
Sure.
I'll pass it off to Sam Solid. Welcome, my friend, and then we'll go Jimmy and Brian.
Hey, Dr. Menaker, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I've been a big follower for a long time. I've listened to many podcast interviews you had, especially with Murad or Futures Trader 71. Man, you're a great listen. You really changed the way that I play this game. But I just have a question regarding because I've been very trying my hardest to stick with the journaling, especially the drilling that you've mentioned. I know I've heard from a lot of professional traders that that's a good method. But I have a question as far as quantifying this data, because I can take the notes and everything, but I'd have to look back at every single thing every single day. Like, it would just take too much time. How would you recommend quantifying the data that someone can have in terms of making less mistakes or getting into less bad trades?
Do you mean quantifying the journaling content, or much? I want to make sure I understand your question.
Is it possible? Because in terms of journaling, do you think the benefit from journaling comes from actually doing the journaling or going back and looking on?
So I think he's asking about performance attribution to drill down.
Yes. So to answer your question, is the answer is yes to both, but I would say I think you get probably a little bit bigger bang for your buck in terms of the actual, what I call the clinical intervention, which is the actual journaling itself in real time. Now, you will get additional benefit from going back and rereading what you've written. I often suggest to my clients, why don't you go back tomorrow morning and reread what you wrote today in your live drill down writing, and sort of remember the patterns that occurred to you yesterday, the internal patterns. But I think, again, there is really nothing that I've come across that's as powerful as in terms of an intervention for yourself as the live journaling in the moment. Going back afterwards, looking at it, very helpful. Highly recommend it. But if I had a gun to my head and I was forced to say which one is going to be more powerful, going back and looking at it in terms of evaluating it versus actually doing it, it's the actual doing it.
And I just want to make sure that all of the audience, please definitely give Andrew a follow, because he shares these pearls of wisdom. I've also shared on the top in the tweet nest rather, in order to give you some of the nuggets that I found, and they have been from all the way from 2020 till now. So definitely give him a follow, so you would be getting those as he tweets along. So having said that, over to you, Jimmy.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. Good afternoon, doctor. Thank you for speaking with us, right? At the risk of sounding too self-deprecating, let's say I'm all the way at the bottom. I don't have self-awareness. I've made a lot of impulse trades. I'm barely break even, and I want to stop the bleeding, right? Or I'm having a bad week. What are the ways that I can reset mentally? And when you talk about making less impulse trades, what does that first step to the 10,000 step journey look like? You mentioned journaling, but what are some of the common patterns you see, and what are the things that you can recommend to, let's say, a beginner?
So one thing it could be an interesting place for someone to start would be this: to go back and do some sim trading for a little bit. Not that you're going to be able to work out the psychological issues in a permanent way on sim, because without cash, without live money on the line, you're going to behave differently. But what you can do is you can begin to recognize the patterns. Can you do the live journaling? Can you do things like that while you're sim trading? Because if you can't do that when you're sim trading, it's going to be nearly impossible, probably will be impossible to do it while you're trading. So I kind of think of it as training wheels. Can you put into practice some of the psychological exercises that I talk about? You can read about on my website and white papers and whatnot. Can you implement that on sim? That would be a great place to start. And can you do that for at least 3 or 4 weeks, not just a few days? I'd say at least 3 weeks. If someone can do that for at least 3 or 4 weeks, then maybe, I'm not saying this is what people need to do, but maybe you consider then going back to live at a certain point and try and continue to incorporate what you were doing for yourself on the sim trading. That can be a nice way to start. If you said if someone's at the very bottom of their performance ladder, people don't like to hear that, because they want to be able to, hey, I want to make money tomorrow. I want to be fixed. People often think of, trading psychology as a mechanical thing. Oh, if I'm going to go work with a head shrink, it's like taking my car to the garage and getting it fixed. And when it comes out, it should be all better. Unfortunately, our brain is not an engine. It's not even a computer. It's actually more complicated than that. And it's our body as well, not just our brain. So, giving yourself an arena like sim trading perhaps, and being able to incorporate some of these psychological exercises and see how that goes for you. And if you can kind of get some traction that way and be real honest with yourself, if you're still putting on impulse trades on sim, or letting trades run too far against you, and then adding to losers so you can get out at a better break even, or if you're completely trading with your hair on fire, even just a couple of times here and there on sim, then that's very diagnostic. It means that that person is probably not ready to go to live trading. So that's an interesting way to start.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
in the world of instant gratification, Dr. Menaker, it's not always the answer
People don't want to hear that.
that people want to hear, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
I'll share a quick little about. We don't have a lot of time, but I can share an interesting story maybe next time about that. So it's a really interesting story. But yeah, I'll keep it open to whatever questions you guys have.
Great. Yeah. So, Brian, welcome. Always a pleasure to have you on, and the floor is yours, my friend.
Great. Thanks for hosting, Rob, and thanks for your time, Dr. Menaker. Not to sound grim, just like Jimmy, but I think this question might be pretty prudent to the current market, which is a bit crazy right now for a lot of people.
For everybody, I think.
Oh, yeah. It's been great. So my question is, from your experience, I'm sure you've seen this, what leads someone to blowing up? And then what would you say are some of the key decisions that someone comes to, and how does that journey work to someone going from, maybe trading for a couple of years and then saying this isn't for me and quitting it all?
God,
just kind of, what does that look like?
Yeah, there's no one way that it looks. I've seen so many different forms of what you just described. Many different forms, many different forms. For example, I've seen a fairly common one is someone does really well, making a lot of money, and they get confident, and to the point where they're very confident, to the point where they become complacent and or arrogant around their risk management, and then that becomes the big downfall, and they give it all back much more quickly than they made the money, often kind of in a fraction of the time. That's the classic kind of fail that happens out there, which is pretty common, unfortunately. And so one of the ways to try and prevent that is to, if you start to feel as though, wow, look at me, I'm hot, I can predict this, I can predict that. And, if you're starting to get into that mode of thinking, I would say check yourself, because that will quickly lead, that type of thinking will quickly lead to being complacent around risk management and arrogance as a trader is very dangerous. So humility is a key attribute, which is hard to do for traders, because many people who are attracted to trading tend to be smart and or very competitive people. And humility is generally not a trait that comes with being smart and or competitive. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so do you have time for maybe
Yeah,
one more?
I can stick around for a little bit. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Naeem, I think we may end with your question if you have one.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hey, how are
awesome.
you?
Welcome. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for all this information, guys. It's helpful a lot, really. I have a question for Dr. Andrew, please. I've been trading for a simulator for it's been a while now. So I'm in a program that I have to achieve certain amount to graduate to like trade with real money.
Mm-hmm.
My problem is most of the time up green of the day, but most of the time I blow up all that green and then I go to red. So it's like it's been bothering me. It's been happening a lot, and I don't know I didn't understand how can I fix that problem? So I go green like I'm up like let's say $400 and then I blow everything up. Like and it's happening like most of the time. So I'm trying to fix it, but this behavior is really bothering me, and I need some help on it, really. So.
Well, I have makes me wonder about a lot of things, Naeem. I mean, I wonder if perhaps during the second part of the day when you start to have the blow up, are you still trading in accordance with your plan or strategy? I don't know. Do you start
It's
putting
overtrading?
the overtrading?
I feel like it's overtrading, So.
Yeah. So here's a challenge, and I'm not a proponent of at all. And I want to make really clear about this. I'm not a proponent of having daily P&L goals. I think that's a big problem. Having said that, for someone in your situation, Naeem, it could be helpful for you to see if you can stop it for the day when you're up at a certain amount of money, and allow yourself to have an experience of that for a period of time, for days or weeks at a time, and to get used to that experience for yourself. Now again, I'm not a proponent of trying to, I want to make X number of dollars a day and that's my goal, and if I can do that, a lot of trading educators push that out there on the public, because it tends to appeal to people's sense of like, oh, that'll fix my greed. If I just only focus on making a certain amount, I won't overtrade and I won't give it back, and that'll be great. And if I add up all the numbers, it'll be a great year. And that's what happens. But that's a dream, and it's not realistic. You can't trade for a certain amount of money. But in your situation, Naeem, to fix your, I'd say a good first step would be, can you stop when you're up $300 or $400 or $500 and just see what it's like for you to stop? You might be tempted to say, God, I think I really got this and I want to make more so I can get on live trading and really make some real money. Well, if you're wrestling with that is, it's quite likely that emotion, emotion is the word motion with an E in front of it. It's energy and motion. It's going to propel you to overtrade, and you're probably going to manufacture opportunities. You're going to find trades that really aren't in your playbook, trades that you don't really have any business being on. And so I think the challenge for someone like you, and I think there's a lot of people in your shoes, Naeem, you're certainly not alone, is to sort of, see if you can back off for the day at a certain amount of money and just see what that's like for a few weeks.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I was just going to say that Dr. Menaker is, Naeem, you're not a lone cat in that situation. Many here,
a large percentage,
here on this
huge
call,
percentage of traders. It's a big club.
So
it's a big club.
Just FYI, buddy, you're not alone. And many folks are sitting here at the end of the day being like, hold on a second, I was up 50 bips. Where did it all go? Right. So no, man.
Thank you so much for everything. Thank you.
Absolutely, you're welcome. Yeah. You're welcome. And so, so Dr. Menaker, I think, unless Trent, did you have a final question, one that you've been burning to ask?
I wanted to be grateful and, summarize what Dr. Menaker shared with us. He shared a lot of nuggets. I'm going to create a tweet thread from it.
Okay.
So Trent,
I just realized something. I wanted to share a little bit, something else I wanted to share with Naeem and anyone else who shares the same in the same predicament. So I've actually been there myself many years ago. It's this. So there's something I call the give back phenomenon. This is probably what happens with Naeem and many traders, is that you're up a certain amount of money. Let's say it's $500, and now all of a sudden you have a trade where maybe you're only up $300 for the day, it doesn't really matter the amount, but the number, what happens is that 500 becomes the anchoring point, and anything less than that feels like a loss. I'm up 300. I used to be up 500, but we don't focus on the 300. We focus on the 200 that we've lost. And what'll happen, and it's called anchoring bias in behavioral finance. That anchoring bias becomes very, very powerful. And now the brain is actually functioning in a state of loss, not in a state of profit. Even though you're still up net for the day, you're thinking about the money that you've given back. And what'll happen is when you get to approximately 40 to 60%, roughly half of the give back from that high water mark, usually the rest of the give back goes very rapidly. The first 30, 40, 50% kind of eats away somewhat slowly often, and then you hit that halfway point, and then the rest of it goes very quickly. I call it the give back phenomenon. So a good thing to think about is to, catch yourself when you've given back half the gains for the day. It's a great stopping place for most people.
That's an amazing insight. So, Dr. Menaker, if folks want to follow up with you for their own consultation or just want to know more about your process and things like that, where can they find you? How can they contact you? How can they reach out to you?
My website is the best place, andrewmenaker.com, and follow me on Twitter. It's funny, my clients who know me say, how come you only have 4,000 or 5,000 followers on Twitter? You should have many more. I don't put myself out there very often. I'm happy to do talks when I get invited, but I'm kind of been under the radar. And so I have my website, and people kind of stumble upon it, or they hear about me from other clients, really is what happens for me. So I would say go to my website and read what I have. There's some white papers that I think are very informative and very helpful for traders. I get a lot of great feedback from those.
Yeah, for those
Amazing.
listening, there's a self-paced course as well. So if you are interested in kind of digging deeper into, into some of the stuff that Dr. Menaker's reviewed today, certainly I would, as I mentioned before, would definitely encourage to review the white papers. But that self-paced course is another great option as well. So
I want to summarize some of the nuggets that we learned, and these are obviously not all of them. Recording of this will be available for everyone. So please do go through that if you want to review. But some of the nuggets were we have to incorporate our internal data, both from physiological standpoint, environment standpoint, as well as from emotional standpoint. So there's three aspects to it, right? The physiology, the environment, and the emotions. From physiology standpoint, nutrition, gut biome, caffeine, heart rate variability, sleep are critical. From your environmental standpoint, having awareness of what we're going through is critical. Dr. Menaker shared his own situation with COVID and how he, stayed away from trading at that time.
It's hard to.
And then, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I agree. You see a trade and you know that this is going to work. It's jump in, but it's difficult to have that self-restraint. From emotional standpoint, we actually got a ton of nuggets and tips, and I'm going to tweet out all of these as a single tweet thread so that folks can follow that. When Rob shares the recording, I'll just create a tweet thread below that. So some of the nuggets were not allowing your P&L to define how you feel about yourself. Two top trades of high performing traders or money managers were quality of decision making and decision hygiene was extremely important for them, and accuracy in responding to their process, sticking to the process and the plan was important to them, and that defined how they became successful. For some of the questions that we had, what leads to someone blowing up? We had a great insight around folks becoming complacent. We also learned about the give back phenomenon. We also learned about how humility sometimes, not sometimes, humility is often not present for most of traders, and that leads them to their ruin. So, having said that, I'm very grateful for Dr. Menaker to present his insights over here. Please give him a follow on Twitter, as well as share this recording, as well as the programming with all the traders that you know, and on your Twitter accounts. So that way, and reach out to him. If you have any needs from a consultation standpoint, definitely the self-paced course, which Rob pointed out, were great. So, having said that, Rob, over to you for
yeah,
conclusion.
thank you. Yeah, just again, just wanted to Thank you again, Dr. Menaker, for sitting down with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Lots, as Trent said, lots of nuggets in here. So, looking forward to, even just re-listening to it myself, right? And so thank you again, for taking the time, and hopefully, obviously, hopefully you feel better soon. And just want to say a happy St. Patty's Day to everybody. We'll do another one of these next month, next April, trying to lock down the guests, but hopefully we'll be able to coordinate with Mike Green, Professor Plume on Twitter. So that should be hopefully we'll have him as our next guest here. So with that, I'll kind of wrap up. And again, thank you so very much, Dr. Menaker. It's been this was one of my most favorite conversations. So
thanks for inviting me, guys. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely awesome. Have a good one,
All right,
everyone.
take care.
Cheers.